What should we expect from New York Ranger goalies Igor Shesterkin and Jonathan Quick this season? We go over the best and worst case scenarios for each New York Ranger netminder, plus a look at two under the radar free agent signings by the Blue Shirts. All this and much, much more on today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers.
You're Locked On the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 874 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And so to kind of kick off what has become an annual tradition here on Locked On New York Rangers, the everydayers, you guys will kind of recognize this episode theme here. It's something that we've done every offseason since Locked On New York Rangers came into existence. And that is, we basically just go through the entire opening night roster, or at least what looks like it will be the opening night roster. And we take a look at every single player. We go through the best and worst case scenarios for all 20 players who I personally expect will be on the Ranger opening night roster. We're doing it a little bit differently this year. Kind of wanted to shake it up anyway, but we usually start with the forwards. And the fact that Alexis Lafreniere is still an impending RFA, we're going to just kind of wait for him to, put pen to paper and officially be back with the New York Rangers. My thought here is we could start with the goalies, go to the defensemen. Maybe by the time we get through all that, we go to the forwards and Alexis Lafreniere is signed. We shall see. But yeah, it's a fun segment. People seem to enjoy it, so figured might as well bring it back here for the offseason. And we'll continue to do these here and there all the way up to opening night until we get to every single player. And we start, of course, with probably the most important player on the New York Rangers, and that would, of course, be Igor Shesterkin. Another way that I always do this, we look at worst case scenario first, because we're optimists on this podcast, right? We're glass half full. We're Ranger fans. We're excited for the upcoming season. We start with worst case. We move on to best case. So the worst case scenario for Igor Shesterkin, I don't think this will take too long because I, like a lot of you, I'm expecting a big-time season from Igor. I mean, why would you not expect that? But I think in a worst case scenario, we will see Igor at some point have, kind of a tough stretch through this upcoming season. He went through a time last season. It was an 18-game stretch, to be specific, where he went 9-6-3 with just an .896 save percentage. He allowed 54 goals in those 18 games. This was a stretch that lasted from December 20th to February 25th. So it did last about 2 months. He also allowed 3 or more goals in 14 of those 18 games. It just was not very Igor Shesterkin-like. I mean, even then, I wasn't really panicking because to me, all it really was a reminder that Igor Shesterkin is indeed human. And what he did 2 years ago in his Vezina winning season, that's not normal for any goalie on this planet at any level. I don't care how good you are. Igor Shesterkin went through something that I don't think he's used to going through at all, and that is a time period where he struggled quite a bit. But obviously, the Rangers weren't playing all that great at that time either. Certainly some of the games where Igor struggled last season, that was definitely the case. He wasn't getting a lot of help either. But once again, to me, it wasn't really anything more than just a reminder that nobody's perfect. No goalie is immune to going through a little bit of a rough patch from time to time. But this actually kind of leads me into another worst case scenario for Igor Shesterkin. I think in a worst case, Igor is really, really hard on himself and kind of beats himself up after, a bad game or a couple of bad games, whatever the situation might be. Look, again, last year, he went through the struggles. I saw it as nothing more than a rare, rough patch for Igor Shesterkin. But I think Igor really took it hard. And I get the feeling that this is probably the first time maybe in his life where he's really gone through any sort of prolonged struggles, any sort of prolonged issues. And I say prolonged. I mean, it was a stretch where, he's playing somewhat subpar between the pipes. It's not like he was like god awful or anything like that or gave the Rangers no chance. It's just that for Igor Shesterkin, who has put up video game numbers at every level of hockey, including the NHL and including his Vezina winning season 2 years ago, it was something that I'm sure he was not used to, and he was tough on himself. There were times where he said, he had that quote after the one game, he said, the goalie was bleep, and I'll let you guys figure out what the bleep is because I'm not allowed to say it and I don't want to say it. But yeah, I mean, he was tough on himself, and I don't know, I just get the feeling that the fact that he was really hard on himself, the fact that he took it so much to heart, possibly at least, I shouldn't say probably, it might have led to him struggling for a little bit longer than he otherwise may have. I get the feeling there were times where maybe he dwelled on it a little bit too much. And listen, I'll take that. I'll take somebody that cares too much over somebody that doesn't care at all any day of the week. It's nice to know that he does have so much passion for this game, and it does matter to him so much how he performs on a night-to-night basis. But I do think there's times where, once the game is over, be mad for the rest of the night, but then the next day, clean slate, let's come back and let's get it the next game. I don't know that for sure. I'm not a psychologist or anything like that, but he certainly was tough on himself, after games where, he didn't have his A game this past season. Best case scenario for Igor Shesterkin. The best compliment that I can give to Igor is we have a season next year where Igor Shesterkin is Igor Shesterkin. It's really just as simple as that. We all know what it looks like when this guy is firing on all cylinders, when he's at the absolute top of his game. He has made some glove saves over the past, really since he came up to the NHL, that have been just nothing short of spectacular, full extension, diving across the crease, reaching upward to snag wrist shots, backhand shots, slap shots, tip-in shots, whatever it might be. His glove saves really are the ones that, to me, more so than any other, usually end up on his highlight reel. He's also a goalie that has just awesome lateral movement from side to side. Never really seems to overcommit either. He'll get to where he needs to be, but if there's an extra pass, he can adjust to that as well. We see him make saves on deflections. We see, when he's at his best, he goes through stretches where he's really not giving up any rebounds. He's also shown a knack for making really clutch saves, big time saves in overtime, big time saves, late in games in the third period where the Rangers have a 1-goal lead. We've seen him do this several times ever since he started his career in the NHL a couple of seasons ago. But yeah, in a best case scenario, Igor Shesterkin is the driving force for the New York Rangers, not just in the regular season, but also in the playoffs. Best case scenario, he is the best player on the team, and your goalie being the best player on your team, that's always, or usually at least, a recipe for success. And immediately, if you have an elite goalie, and I'll always say this, if you have an elite goalie in the playoffs, you've got a shot. I don't care what your record was in the regular season. If you have a goalie that's able to just kind of, shoulder the load, carry the team from time to time when it's necessary, steal some wins, you've always got a chance when it comes to the Stanley Cup playoffs. And, again, I know that there's different theories on how important a goalie is in the playoffs, but to me, always the ultimate X factor. And I think with Igor Shesterkin, somebody as talented as he is, when you're talking about playoff hockey and you talk about, the goalie can always be the X factor, Igor Shesterkin is good enough, and I think you guys will agree with me on this. He is good enough where he could be the factor, the complete X factor, not just on the Rangers, but across the entire landscape of the Stanley Cup playoffs. When this guy is at the top of his game, it is very, very difficult to solve him. And we've seen him, again, over the past couple of seasons here and in some playoff games where he's just at his absolute best and he's just not going to let the puck get by him. And yeah, obviously the Rangers, they get to the playoffs, they're going to need more than just Igor Shesterkin. I think this last year against the Devils certainly proves that. There were games where Igor would give up a lot of goals, but the Rangers as a team performed so badly that I just could not put it on Igor Shesterkin. They were just flat, lackluster performances, and Igor at times paid the price for it. At other times in that series, he was outstanding, but I think Igor Shesterkin is the last guy I would point to as far as why the Rangers couldn't get past the Devils in the first round this past season. And the year before that, as far as making it to the Eastern Conference Final, if you take games 3 and 4 against Pittsburgh out of the equation, he was phenomenal throughout that entire run. So Igor Shesterkin, once again, somebody that has the ability to be that guy that can lead the Rangers a long, long way come Stanley Cup playoff time. And, we'll keep our fingers crossed that Igor's got his A game throughout the entire season, really, but especially when the Rangers get to the playoffs, because he has the difference he has the ability, rather, to make the difference in a playoff series and just be better than the opposing team's goalie, pick up the Rangers when they need to, whether it's a turnover, an inability to clear the zone, just a clutch save late in the game, whatever the situation might be. Igor can be that dude in the playoffs, and we've seen proof for that the past couple of seasons here. Speaking of any given year, how about another Vezina trophy for Igor Shesterkin? I certainly don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. I think it could happen as soon as this upcoming year. He did it 2 years ago, put up just phenomenal video game-like numbers 2 seasons ago. The race was over by the time we got about 2/3 of the way through last season. Barring just an unforeseen complete collapse from Igor Shesterkin down the stretch 2 years ago, he had the Vezina locked up. He had the Vezina locked up to such a degree that he was actually in the mix for an MVP award. And he was indeed one of the 3 finalists, along with McKinnon and McDavid. I don't have any problem with McDavid winning the award. But Igor Shesterkin was certainly in the mix for that award. and definitely deserves some consideration. Got some consideration, just didn't win it. But as far as another Vezina goes, last year he wasn't really in the conversation all that much because I think what happened was obviously he had that rough stretch that we talked about, and honestly, you go through a rough stretch, it's going to be very, very difficult to win the Vezina. It's obviously a very competitive league. There's a lot of really good goalies, and to win the Vezina, you can't afford anything worse than like a bad night here, a bad night there. A stretch of not so good hockey, that's going to pretty much cost you the Vezina. You're not going to be in the mix, but I do think Igor Shesterkin talented enough, driven enough, competitive enough, just has a great all-around game as an NHL goalie. And any given season, he could be at the top of the class, the top of the NHL goalie class when it comes to the end of the season. And he could be right there in the mix for a Vezina, at least a nomination, if not another victory. I think in a best case scenario, Igor Shesterkin does bring home Vezina number 2 in the past 3 years. I think also in a best case scenario, we see Igor Shesterkin shut down some of the teams in the Metro Division with which he has struggled a little bit in the past. Not like he's been terrible or anything like that, but one team that has had his number a little bit, we have to admit this, is the New York Islanders. Against the Islanders, Igor Shesterkin has a .313 goals against average, a save percentage of just .881, and that's in 10 games, which is not a huge sample size, but it's not an extraordinarily small sample size either. His record in those games also is 2-7-1, and the Islanders just aren't a team with an offensive attack strong enough where they should be putting up that kind of numbers against Igor Shesterkin. So I look for Igor to turn that around this upcoming season too. There's 2 other teams in the Metro where Igor certainly isn't bad, but I think he can certainly do better. One is the Devils. Igor against the Devils has a winning record. He's 7-5-1, goals against average of .279, save percentage of .917. That's not bad at all. The Rangers did struggle against the Devils a little bit this past season, though. Igor, by the way, has also shut out the Devils twice. And then against the Capitals, I mean, again, not bad numbers at all. Igor is 6-3, .279 goals against average against the Caps, and a .914 save percentage. I think with Igor, though, we just set the bar so high that we expect him to do better. Really, the only team that you can point to that Igor's faced, a decent amount of times that has truly had his number is the Islanders. So fingers crossed that he can do a little bit better against them for this upcoming season. And Igor does have very, very good numbers against some really good teams, some of which he hasn't faced that much, but he's got great numbers against the Lightning, the Avalanche, the Penguins, the Leafs, and the Flyers, just to name a few, couple of Metro teams and a couple of teams that aren't from the Metro, but certainly have a potent offensive attack, and Igor has mostly shut them down. Again, the only team you can point at that he's really struggled against, that he faces with any kind of regularity, is the Islanders. I think also in a best case scenario, just kind of a fun one to wrap up the Igor Shesterkin section here before we move on to Jonathan Quick. In a best case scenario, Igor Shesterkin scores the first goal of his NHL career this upcoming season. He's been close a couple of times where he shot the puck down the ice while the opposition has had their goalie pulled. And, there was a situation 2 years ago where I was doing predictions for the second half of the season, and I had said previously that Igor Shesterkin will score a goal before it's all said and done. I decided to up the ante. I said he's going to get one this season. And then literally like the next game, I think it was, empty net for the opposition. Igor shoots the puck down the rink. I stand up out of my seat, and he couldn't have missed by more than like 3 or 4 inches from at least hitting the post. So if that had happened, man, I might have had to hang him up after that one because it wasn't going to get any better than that. But yeah, that's kind of a fun one. And I think he will do it before his career ends. I mean, he's just such a great puck handler, great passer. We've seen him spring guys on breakaways in the past and odd man rushes that have led to goals for the Rangers. Why not? Why doesn't Igor Shesterkin get his first goal this upcoming season? So we'll keep everything rolling. Take a look at Jonathan Quick, who the Rangers obviously signed to be the backup to Igor Shesterkin for this upcoming season. We'll get to that in just a second. But first, gotta let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think will hit the first home run. All on an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, we just want to go ahead and thank everybody, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And for the everydayers, definitely stick around. We're going to be doing more of these best and worst case scenarios all throughout the offseason here. Going to line up some guests for you guys as well, and continue to have fun in our offseason coverage of the New York Rangers as we build toward the preseason and ultimately the regular season. But for right now, let's go ahead, continue our focus on the New York Ranger netminders and shift our focus just a little bit to Jonathan Quick, who the Rangers signed to a one-year deal this offseason to come in and be the backup to Igor Shesterkin. And once again, we'll do the worst-case scenarios first, and on the good stuff, the best-case scenarios. Worst-case scenario for Quick, I think we basically get about the same Jonathan Quick that we've been seeing play hockey for the last handful of seasons here. If we look at his past 5 seasons combined, so we're at the point where this isn't a fluke. Obviously, we're talking about half a decade here, but you look at what he's done in the past 5 years, and that's 4.5 seasons with the Kings, and then also the past half season with the Vegas Golden Knights. He wins the third Stanley Cup of his career with the Knights as the backup to Adin Hill. But in those 5 seasons, Quick has put up a goals against average of 3.01 and a save percentage of just 897. He has gone 82, 82, and 28 in those seasons, which honestly, that's probably a bit better of a record than you might think with the save percentage being what it is, goals against average being what it is. He's also got 9 shutouts in that time. So if we get that version of Jonathan Quick, I guess it's not the end of the world. You'd want better numbers from your backup, but the bottom line is if he can at least give the Rangers a chance, they get into the playoffs, and hopefully your backup goalie, whether it's Quick or anybody else, is not going to be much of a factor come Stanley Cup playoff time anyway. So, I guess you could live with those numbers, but you'd want a little bit better, I think, for sure. The other thing I can come up with for Jonathan Quick as far as a worst-case scenario is maybe the fans don't exactly warm up to him right away. Man, it feels like an eternity ago, but 9 years ago, which honestly is kind of a long time, we saw the Rangers against the Kings in the Stanley Cup final. And of course, Jonathan Quick was the opposing goalie for the Kings. Just a phenomenal run through the playoffs for Quick and the Kings, and they defeat the Rangers in 5 games. And I think for Ranger fans, when you're talking about Jonathan Quick, when that name comes up, it's kind of hard not to think about that right away. You think about Jonathan Quick, you think about somebody that has been an outstanding goalie, probably going to be a Hall of Famer, and has won 2 Stanley Cups as the starter, and now this 3rd Stanley Cup as a backup. And it's just really hard for your mind to not immediately go to that Stanley Cup final matchup between the Rangers and the Kings. To me, I've never taken it personally. Jonathan Quick, what do you want him to do? He's on the Kings, and he's got a job to do, and he went out there and did it to the best of his ability and helped his team win a Stanley Cup. I don't take it personally, but even when I think of Quick, I do think of that Stanley Cup final matchup between the Rangers and the Kings. And so if there's a situation where Jonathan Quick struggles a little bit out of the starting blocks with the New York Rangers, and they don't win a whole lot of his first couple of starts, I could see the fans maybe getting on him a little bit. Maybe he starts to hear it from the fans because it's kind of like, oh man, this guy prevented us from winning a Stanley Cup 9 years ago, and now he's here and he's not doing so great in the backup role as a member of this team. So, it wouldn't really be anything that Quick did wrong. Again, he went out there and he won a Stanley Cup. What do you want him to do? But I could see a situation where maybe some of the fans, they might be not warming up to him right away in the first place. And then if he struggles, that would just kind of compound the issue. But that's about it as far as worst case scenarios for Jonathan Quick. Obviously he's going to be in the backup goalie role. I think in a best case scenario, Jonathan Quick becomes Benoit Allaire's latest success story. Of course, Benoit Allaire, long tenured New York Ranger goalie coach, and has done just a phenomenal job with pretty much every goalie that's come and gone ever since he's been with the New York Rangers. Obviously, the first 2 names that come to mind are Henrik Lundqvist and Igor Shesterkin, and the work that he did with the 2 of them. But you can also look at guys like Antti Raanta, Cam Talbot, guys that have gone on to have really nice careers in this league, first, or at least early in their career, getting some tutelage from Benoit Allaire. One thing Benoit Allaire has never done, unless you count Halak last season, is he's never really had a situation where he gets a goalie on the Ranger team and they become something of a reclamation project. And that's what Jonathan Quick is going to be for Benoit Allaire. Obviously, we went through his credentials, all the Stanley Cups, all the incredible seasons, the accolades that Jonathan Quick has won, but he's fallen off a little bit these past couple of seasons. He is now 37 years old. He'll turn 38 while the season is going. So can Benoit Allaire take a goalie that, has kind of fallen on some hard times and correct their flaws and get them back to a place where they need to be? We will see. But in a best case scenario, I think Jonathan Quick gets whatever he can get from Benoit Allaire. And obviously Quick has done a lot in this league and Maybe there's only so much he can learn, but Benoit Allaire, his track record speaks for itself. And I think in a best case scenario, Jonathan Quick benefits from Benoit Allaire's teachings. You're never too old to learn more. And I think Jonathan Quick could be an example of that. I think in a best case scenario, Jonathan Quick is one of the absolute best backup goalies in hockey. I really don't think this is impossible, despite the struggles he's had the past couple of seasons. He's got a couple of things working from him. For starters, I get the feeling that he really wanted to come to the New York Rangers. He is from Connecticut. He's from the area, and he's played his entire career on the opposite coast with the Los Angeles Kings, save for the half season with Vegas, which, that's not any, or at least not much closer to this area. So he's come back home. He'll get the chance to play in front of his friends and family. I think he'll enjoy that. I think he'll like that. I think, again, he definitely wanted to be a member of the New York Rangers. More importantly, though, Jonathan Quick, this is the first time in his career that he is entering the season as the clear-cut, hands-down backup goalie. And I realize, his role has been scaled back with the Kings a little bit. There's been times where the Kings have gone with this goalie or they've gone with that goalie while Quick, kind of is regulated to a backup goalie, but this is the first time where there's nothing to debate. There's no discussion to be had. Jonathan Quick 100% will be a bona fide backup goalie coming into the season. And again, I just mentioned he's getting older. He's 37 now. He'll be 38 in January. He might just be at the point where he just physically cannot endure the workload that he used to endure. And so maybe the backup goalie role is exactly what the doctor ordered. Maybe he'll be a little bit refreshed. He's got, longer times between starts where, his body can rest and recuperate and get back to where he needs to be to get back out there, whenever Igor needs an off day, and give the Rangers the best chance that he possibly can to win. I do think that maybe the backup goalie is just what the doctor ordered for Jonathan Quick here. Obviously, it's something new for him, so there's always the chance that could go the other way, that he's not used to playing this infrequently. But I think Jonathan Quick, he's a pro, and obviously getting toward the end of his career, I think that being a backup goalie will work well for him this upcoming season. And whenever he's on the ice, I think more often than not, he will give the Rangers a chance to win, and that's obviously what will happen in a best-case scenario. And, it's not just all the wear and tear on Jonathan Quick, in the regular season. He's also played close to 100 postseason games as well. So obviously, he's done a lot in this league and probably is at the point where he's best suited as a backup goalie. I think in a best case scenario, he can also be something of a mentor for Igor Shesterkin as well as the entire New York Ranger team. And I know that Ranger fans on social media were kind of debating this. Why does Igor Shesterkin need a mentor? Obviously he's had a ton of success early in his career in this league. It goes back to something that I was talking about when we discussed Igor Shesterkin earlier in this episode. Igor, once again, was really, really hard on himself during the times where he was interviewed after some games when he was going through that rough patch last season. And maybe Jonathan Quick, having done everything, having seen everything, having been to the playoffs a million times, having won 3 Stanley Cups, having seen a whole bunch of teammates come and go during his tenure as a member of the Los Angeles Kings, maybe Jonathan Quick can help Igor Shesterkin just a little bit with the mental side of the game. And again, I'm not saying that Igor Shesterkin is in desperate need of this. Igor can carry himself just fine. But to me, it can't hurt to have somebody, once again, who's been there and done that and seen just about everything that there is to see as a player in the National Hockey League. It can't possibly be a bad thing. As for the rest of the team, it's not just Igor. Jonathan Quick can impart some veteran wisdom on other players. As the backup goalie, he'll have a little bit more time on his hands, you would think. And I know, skaters and goalies can be apples and oranges a little bit, but to me, never hurts to have a couple of Stanley Cup winners in that locker room. And between Barclay Goodrow with 2 Stanley Cups, Nick Bonino with 2 Stanley Cups, and Igor with a bunch of Stanley Cups. Wouldn't that be awesome? Jonathan Quick with 3 Stanley Cups. You're talking about a total of 7 Stanley Cups in that Ranger locker room. That's more than the Rangers have had in a long, long time. And Jonathan Quick, one of those guys that knows what it takes to win in this league, not just in the regular season, but obviously in the playoffs as well. And again, not a bad thing to have an elder statesman and somebody that is a proven winner in your locker room. So in a best case scenario, I think he becomes one of the leaders, or as much of a leader as you can be, as the backup goalie for this team. We'll keep everything rolling in just a second. That kind of wraps up the best case and worst case portion of today's episode. But I do want to shift our attention to the final 2 New York Ranger UFA signings from that initial flurry, the first day or 2 of unrestricted free agency. Obviously, it's a complete sprint as soon as free agency begins at noon on those days. And the Rangers, there's only 2 UFAs left that they signed during that flurry that we have not discussed yet. They are Nicolas Brouillard and Mac Hollowell. And we're going to discuss each of them and what they bring to the table and what we can expect from them in just a second here. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here. Like I said just a second ago, we're going to shift our attention to the final two New York Ranger UFAs that were signed once again during that initial run, that initial madness when free agent frenzy begins. And they are, once again, two defensemen. You got Nicholas or Niko. I'm not sure which one he prefers to go by. We'll say Niko Brouillard, and Mac Hollowell. And we'll start with Brouillard to just kind of give you guys a rundown. Who is this guy? Where does he come from? What are the Rangers expecting from him? He is 28 years old. He signs a one-year contract with the Rangers worth the league minimum of $775,000. That was once again on the first day of free agency, and he will be a UFA when this upcoming season ends. At first glance, this seems like the definition of organizational depth. 28 years old. I mean, you can't really look at him as like a big-time prospect anymore, I wouldn't think. Got to figure he's going to start the season with the Hartford Wolfpack and just kind of, once again, serve his organizational depth. He'll have his role on the Hartford Wolfpack. And, if he vastly exceeds expectations there and the Rangers have any kinds of injuries, knock on wood, then maybe he becomes an option. But I don't really see it. I think the Rangers don't see it either. I think they see him as somebody that's just going to play with the Hartford Wolfpack this upcoming season. He was undrafted. He played 3 seasons of hockey at McGill University. He played one AHL game with the Toronto Marlies in 2016-2017. He has spent the past 3 seasons with the San Diego Gulls of the AHL. And the Gulls, for anyone wondering, they are the affiliate of the Anaheim Ducks. This past season, 72 games for Brouillard. He scored 6 goals, had 33 assists, and was a minus 27 in those games. For his entire AHL career, spanning all the games that he's played with all the different teams, 168 games for Brouillard, 22 goals, 70 assists. So 92 points in 168 games does, put up decent offense for a defenseman. But he, to this date, has never appeared in an AHL game. Would seem to be an uphill battle for him to finally do so with the Rangers this upcoming season. It just feels like there's a lot of people in front of him in the pecking order, but I suppose never say never. A point that I made not too long ago is we didn't expect Ben Harpur to play whatever it was. I think it was like 42 games for the Rangers this past season, so never say never. But I think right now, as things stand, he's got a lot of people he would have to jump to even be in consideration to see time with the Rangers. But should be somebody that can carve out a role for himself with the Hartford Wolfpack. The other UFA, the final UFA of this initial flurry for the Rangers, 24-year-old defenseman Mac Hollowell. He signs a one-year deal worth the league minimum of $775,000. He will be a restricted free agent with arbitration rights after this upcoming season concludes. Hollowell was taken by the Leafs in the 2018 NHL draft. He went in the 4th round at number 118 overall. Actually played the first 6 games of his NHL career this past season with the Leafs. No goals, 2 assists. He was a +3, averaged 12 minutes and 56 seconds of ice time, blocked 6 shots, dished out 3 hits. And there's a stat here, and this might be the classic example of sometimes stats just kind of happen, right? But I'd be remiss if I didn't at least point this out. In the 6 games that Hollowell played for the Leafs last season, the Leafs went 5-0-1. So there is that. Make of that what you will. Probably not much, but again, it's a stat that I had to at least toss out there. The fact that this team did not fail to record a point and won 5 of the 6 games that Hollowell played in. So again, make of that what you will. But Hollowell, for the most part, has spent a heck of a lot more time in the AHL than the NHL. He has played parts of 5 AHL seasons, all with the Marlies, which is, of course, the AHL affiliate of the Toronto Maple Leafs. 124 games, 10 goals, 51 assists, so 61 points in 124 AHL games. Again, decent offensive numbers for a defenseman. But the one thing that really stands out, he's undersized as a defenseman. 5'9", 170, let's try this again. Okay, 5'9", 170 pounds. So even as a forward, you would be somewhat undersized, at those dimensions. But again, it's the same thing that we pretty much just said with Brouillard. I think the Rangers see him as organizational depth and somebody that can kind of fill out the lineup with the Hartford Wolfpack. Once again, never say never, because the Rangers have shown if you do enough to earn a chance, you play well enough, you show out well enough, they don't really care too much about your draft status and where you came from. If they feel like you can get the job done, they will give you your opportunity. So we'll see what happens there. But once again, somebody that just seems like organizational depth for the Rangers and somebody that will play some kind of a role with the Hartford Wolfpack. So I figure we could pretty much call it there for today. We are through the entire class of unrestricted free agents. I did want to mention, once again, for anybody that can remember what they were doing and who they were with and how they celebrated when Derek Stepan scored his Game 7 overtime winner against the Washington Capitals, definitely send your stories my way. We did the same thing with Artemi Panarin this past offseason, and it was just a lot of fun to go through all these stories, read them on an episode of Locked On New York Rangers. I always love hearing this stuff, and some really funny stories, some really heartfelt stories, just some awesome stories. And I've heard back from a couple of you guys as far as Derek Stepan, his overtime winner is concerned, but I want to hear from a few more, and hopefully we can get an episode out of that. Also, fantasy hockey. We are doing our Locked On New York Rangers Fantasy Hockey League again this upcoming season. I've heard back from a couple of you guys who played last year. I've also heard from some people who did not play last year. If you played last year, your spot is secure. You just got to let me know within a reasonable amount of time here. I'll eventually set a deadline. And then once everybody who played last year is accounted for, we will open up the league to some people who didn't play last year and are trying to get in. So definitely let me know if you're looking to play this upcoming season, if you have not already. And that's pretty much it. Just one last reminder also that Locked On Rangers, as well as all the Locked On NHL podcasts, are dropping from 5 episodes per week down to 3 episodes per week, but that's only temporary. It's not going to last very long. I can't imagine it'll last longer than like 7 or 8 weeks tops. We got the preseason coming up. Before we know it, it'll be here. We'll be back to 5 days per week. And obviously just going through the epic roller coaster that is New York Ranger hockey, and definitely looking forward to that. But that will do it for today, guys. Once again, if you'd like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that's @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.